We begin again. Slightly late. I think the plan is to pretty much pick up where we left off yesterday with the expectation that Energy Dompter's going to head in here. We can talk about aspect realism. And then perhaps we could continue on this Alex O'Connor video that we keep inching forward in every day. That is the plan. So the last thing that I said was this. I think we're basically walking through how we might want to go about this automatic behaviors section, which is going to be after the biological conditions. We need to move this up. This needs to be there. And then we can get into more concrete stuff like emotion regulation and cognitive function, because those can now leverage these more fundamental ideas of biological conditions, automatic behaviors, and then obviously deliberate reflection as the means in which we can notice something happening and then doing something consciously to change it. That's what deliberate reflection is all about. So noticing perhaps the phenomenology of certain underlying biological reactions. So the feeling of energy or the feeling of motivation and dopamine and attention and focus, noticing where your attention and focus are. Social molecules we could talk about. Yeah. And then automatic behaviors is kind of a little bit higher abstraction where we're pointing out that our brains point us in certain directions that are either built in or learned. So that's what we need to cover. So I say, starting off within this section, it seems that the neurobiology of the autopilot leverages what we just learned in the previous section to discuss perhaps what we could describe as like one layer of abstraction up the behaviors of these neural networks that contribute to what we intuitively understand as automatic behaviors. Okay. Of the autopilot. Why would I have said the autopilot? The neurobiology of the... Was I supposed to be saying the... Huh. Maybe I was probably referencing something. Yeah, that's what I was referencing. Okay. For habits of thought, my idea was that this would be different than cognitive biases in my mind. Cognitive biases would be there for any human, but different humans would have different habits of thought. Now, there's obviously a lot of gray area in between this, as a lot of our culture is retained over many years. So you can imagine that currently there's aspects of the habits of our thought that are shaped across cultures. That being said, perhaps we should talk about what type of range as well, that type of range as well. Cognitive biases, though, I would want to talk about the things that would affect anyone regardless of their belief system. And then habits of thought, we would want to go all the way to the point where we can talk about habits of negative thoughts or habits of thinking that the world is a certain way. This is all to continue to bolster the idea that our thoughts are conditioned and there aren't some reflection of some absolute epistemology of the world. So in this section, we need to keep in mind that we only have one layer of subsections. Okay, I'm now pointing out a constraint regarding how we set up our document here. So imagine the section is automatic behaviors, and then under that, we just have one level of headers. So we can't have subheaders under that. Given that, what do you think that the subheaders should be? And then I say we need to figure out how to have the conversation of cognitive biases and social dynamics in such a way where we point out that these are connected concepts and that a lot of the time our cognitive biases are confirmation biases or cognitive biases or confirmation biases are affected by the social dynamics at play. Perhaps social dynamics is a more fundamental topic to talk about prior to cognitive biases because that affects how we think about what loss would be in the case of loss aversion or what the implications of confirmation would be. Keep in mind that within each of these subsections, we need a narrative direction that is both cohesive and coherent within the subsection, but also works with the other subsections in creating a section-wide narrative that makes sense. We will want to go pretty in depth for the strategy of intervention. I think we want to cover how to effectively leverage these layers for the sake of our own feeling of freedom and intentionality. All right. And then the response is, this section, automatic behaviors, moves the conversation one layer of abstraction up from the biological fuel and the conscious levers of attention. Here we examine the functional architecture of the mind's autopilot, how the neural systems we just explored organize themselves into the persistent, often invisible loops that define our daily reality. So I'm going to just put... This is like a thesis that we can just kind of keep here, because that's the right thesis here. The goal is to demonstrate that what we experience as the world is often a collection of conditioned scripts. By understanding these scripts, we can move on. So this is already covered in part 1. We can move from passive molding of our environment toward the deliberate active molding of our agency, our own agency. You know what? I'm thinking that we might not want to talk through that, and I'm going to change a couple things. I want to say... the idea that we thoroughly discussed. This is all to not bolster, to stay grounded in the idea that we thoroughly discussed in part 1, that our thoughts are conditioned and that they are some reflection. Okay. And then the other thing is, at the end, I want to say something like, how does this all sound to you? Before we start writing, I want to make sure that we have an effective direction for this section. One that introduces / discusses topics in an appropriate order. In a way that makes sense and is compelling. That makes sense, aligns with the most rigorous view of these rigorous / contemporary view of these topics, and is compelling. Boom. So in this case, I feel like Google fixed or changed their system where now they can go real quickly, like what GPT does. And it just doesn't think as long, which maybe is a good thing. Maybe it's not. We'll see. Sounds like a rigorous and architecturally sound approach. By moving from the hardwired sociality of the human animal into the software of personal habits, you maintain the document's commitment to grounded empirical science while acknowledging the profound malleability of the human experience. Onion Helmet, what's good? Stana the Mana with a banana. The Mana Lana, the Mana Pana. Okay. I should get a banana one of these days. I feel like bananas are disarming in a sense. The narrative arc here should move from the unavoidable neurobiology and sociality to the systemic universal biases to the individual personal habits of thought, finally landing on the intentional intervention. So the sociality, I guess that is built in. Neurobiology and sociality are built in. That's kind of what we discussed. And then the universal biases. This would be like cognitive biases, I believe, right? Like this is like maybe conceptualizing the behavior of these guys. And then we could see, all right, let's just see how this positions it. Narrative direction. This subsection bridges the biological fuel section with behavioral biological fuel. I don't think we call it that, right? Yeah, biological conditions. With behavioral programming, it describes how neural networks discussed previously organize into functional loops. Automation is a functional necessity to avoid combinatorial explosion, the paralysis of having to consciously decide every micro movement and sensory filter. I think that's good stuff. So we can start adding this in here. So let's start adding in notes. This subsection bridges that with that key concept adjudication. Beautiful. Now this actually I could keep that there. Social dynamics. So now that these have to be the main. Oh, here we go. The adjudication. Adjudication of drives can't be a subtopic, so I can throw this all here. But with that in mind, now that we have now that we're structuring it this and that way, I've been researching about changing people's mind thing. Yo, what are you learning? What's coming up here? That's going to be something we have to look into in April. So please, please, what is it? Storm that beach before us and let me know. So the key concept, automation is a functional necessity. Yep, and then we could talk about the actual mechanisms underlying that, and then the adjudication. We've got explains how the brain acts as a neuroeconomic marketplace where the ventromedial prefrontal cortex weights competing drives to decide which behavior wins the moment. Right. So this is the way we'd want to go. So this is like mechanisms, the mechanisms behind automation, the key mechanisms behind automation, and then we've got the adjudication. All right, your question about the Germans during World War II and how they came to believe and do things they did is relevant here, I think, absolutely. But I came across Daryl Davis. He has a lot of talks. The good thing is that Daryl Davis has a lot of experience talking with people who not only hold wildly different opinions, but literally hate him. Okay. Social dynamics and collective automaticity. So, taxonomy of automaticity. Where would this be in this framework here? I'm guessing it could be in there, but this is what, pre-attentive. We would want to determine where, okay. To integrate into what we discuss above to provide intuitive connections with each mechanism. That's what I think would have to happen here. Not all automatic behaviors are created equal. A dive should distinguish between these four categories. So we can discuss that. We can ask that. And we don't need this taxonomy. But social dynamics and collective automaticity would be important here. You suggested this is as a more fundamental layer, which is scientifically astute. Humans are obligatory gregarious, Our automation is first and foremost tuned to the tribe. The social prior. This section argues that our perception of value threat is pre-filtered by the need for belonging. Discuss mimetic desire. An in-group out. Okay, but we need this to be concrete. Unless we talk about that in this section, right? We could do that. Yeah, we could do neurobiology of social dynamics. Include this. So that once we get to this point, we can talk about I wonder if we should just combine whatever is discussed here into this first subsection. Because then we get to the universal scripts of cognitive bias. Building on the social layer, we move to the heuristics that affect all humans regardless of culture. These are evolutionarily rooted shortcuts. Cognitive misers, the brain uses these to navigate complexity without taxing working memory. Connection to sociality, frames as being tied to social standing, losing status. Okay. I feel like there's going to be more to talk about here. Okay. If you search Dale Davis, that site, a good talk he gave, TEDx talks might come up on the site. It might be under the videos section on the TEDx talk site. I wouldn't recommend playing the video because of certain reason, but you can read the description. Because of certain reason. Okay. Am I supposed to click on? Oh, in the actual TED Talk. Oh, this is still going to YouTube. This is the interview. Is it this one? I could also just Gemini this. Yeah, but my question would be, how does this all connect back to the topic of oh, I see. YI. This would be it, right? Oh, but it has a talk details. Aha. All right. An encounter with prejudice early in life led black musician Daryl Davis on a quest to determine the source of the hate leading to how and why he has attended KKK rallies. His unorthodox yet simple approach has wielded surprising results and just might be the solution for all racial discourse. Daryl Davis graduated from Howard University with a degree in jazz as a pianist, vocalist, and guitarist. He performs nationally and internationally with the Daryl Davis Band. He has worked with such notables as Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley's Jordanaires, the legendary blues band, and many others. In 1983, a chance occurrence after one of his performances led him to befriend a member of the KKK. This eventually led Daryl to become the first black author to travel the country interviewing KKK leaders and members, all detailed in his book, Clandestine Relationships. Today, Daryl owns numerous robes and hoods. Okay. Since his journey, okay. Joined an all-white country band. He's even the Godfather. Okay. You see that this could be perceived as just someone that happens to still be racist. So the question is, this doesn't tell us what he says in the talk, right? Well, yeah, I would want to get to like almost immediately, just so that we don't have to deal with all the difficulty in this premise so far. Like, what is his conclusions here? Because we can't just say that because he is particularly charismatic and he's not getting disliked, that therefore he's got, like, it could just be his personality. So we need to know what he's actually saying is something that we can follow. Oh, that's why it's interesting. Right. Now, once again, or not once again, but something that we have to be looking out for is people that change other people's minds might not know why they change other people's minds. I know that sounds crazy, but it could just be personality, charisma. He actually has a strategy. Okay, so if he has a strategy, then let's find it. What is Daryl Davis's strategy for changing people's minds? All right, I don't know if I'm gonna give him the platform of actually listening to him speak. I don't know if I want to give JRE the platform right now either. So I might just read Gemini. An American R&B, okay, his strategy is not based on debate or confrontation, but on a specific form of engagement and relationship building. Below is the breakdown of the core tenets of his methodology. How can you hate me when you don't even know me yet? Or know me? He approaches individuals with the intent to answer this question rather than to argue, which shifts the dynamic from a battle to inquiry. Okay. Curious over furious. Genuine curiosity instead of meeting hatred with outrage or condemnation. He meets it with civility and patience. Right. I mean, these are like pragmatic tips for dealing with someone that, might hate you. The issue is when dealing with someone like a group like the KKK, at some point, you have to point out that the number one goal isn't to persuade them otherwise, but it has to be to set some social rule or some social, like, standard of what people are allowed to do, right? So, it might not, I don't know how to say this. It might be more important that we ensure that this type of racism is stopped in its tracks in a more like you have to stop, I don't know. You'd want to stop the organization, or you'd want to stop something in its tracks just to institute the rule that you can't be doing this type of thing. So socially, I think that's what people want to do. They want to say, hey, like, we should not platform this at all. And now, granted, he might have a strategy for making people not dislike him, but then, that's another thing. Like, could they, the issue with racist people is that when they don't know someone, that's when they attribute the stereotype. So they're not gonna know everyone. So Daryl Davis has gotten to the point where he's well known. The question is, like, is Daryl Davis, like, infiltrating and then disbanding KKK groups? But it doesn't seem to be that's the case. He's just making friends, and then the friends are not disliking him because they're friends. It's kind of similar to how a lot of people in the USA know immigrants, yet are still anti-immigrant. And they're gonna, if they really think about it, they would be like, well, I know this person's not bad, so I don't really care about this, but I want these other people that I don't know so I'm gonna put the, I'm going to think that they're bad. Davis isn't a scientist by any means, but I think there has to be something under the surface here that makes these people switch their beliefs so wildly. So yeah, but that's the thing, do they switch their beliefs so wildly? That's what I'm trying to wonder. I'm not seeing any evidence of switching beliefs because they're keeping the KKK as their identity. That's an issue. How drastically does he actually sway the beliefs of these people he's with? They literally leave the organization. Okay, they disavow it with him in talks. That's great. Okay, that's why he has multiple gifted robes. Oh, he's getting robes from people that have left. That's cool. I see. Is often measured by both the tangible symbols of resignation he has collected and the leadership level of the people he has influenced. While he does not claim to have converted everyone he meets, the results he reports are statistically significant for an individual effort. Yeah, so I think that this is a great case study for how you would need to change people's views in this drastic way. Like, I think this is pointing out how important the social dynamics are towards our beliefs. And yeah, a friend telling you something is going to be more significant than someone that you already are predisposed to dislike is telling you that. And if they can get to the point where they become a friend, then they can be more convincing. But once again, yeah, I think there's like a more difficult topic of whether or not, we should be doing certain types of rehabilitation on people that we believe are wildly immoral. And that's a good question. Maybe this is something that should be done within, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know enough about this topic, but that is pretty cool. And also, I guess, to connect this back to the type of discussion that we're going to have here, that Mr. It's quite and it's so weird because everyone thinks their beliefs are based on concrete facts and evidence, right? Yeah, once again, I don't think anyone's beliefs are based on concrete facts and evidence. I think Mr. Davis is perhaps a case study for that, or against that, I guess. To connect this back to how we need to talk about this, there's underlying things that are happening when people become friends with Mr. Davis that are affecting how they respond to information, and really it's the types of experiences they have over time. I think even though that's a good case study, it might be a little higher abstraction than we need to talk about, but maybe we could still talk about it in that way. Maybe we could just say, like, hey, like, friends, yeah, we could still talk about it in that. You know what? We might even be able to include him. I'm not sure. It is somewhat still anecdotal. I'm not a fan of the fact that this person could still have an abnormal personality, like could be particularly charismatic or particularly smart. And, we have to watch out for using a case study like that because we're trying to provide tools that anyone can use, and if the tool requires a certain level of charisma or whatnot, then that might be difficult. That's why we have the science. Yep. But it would be crazy if we could create an experiment based on that premise. Okay, so we got to this social dynamics and collective automaticity, but I'm not sure if I like that. Universal scripts of cognitive bias. Right. This would be... Oh, I really like this. The intuitive heuristics. But is this all just still the same? Okay. What else does it have? Strategies for de-automatization. Okay, okay. All right. First observation is that we can afford more subsections. Here are my thoughts. I like the idea of having a neurobiological foundation subsection which takes the baton from the previous section, biological conditions, and points out how this manifests as drives, automated behavior, etc. at the biological level. Here are my notes. Okay, after that, we can start planning out how to organize these next topics. We've got this guy. We've got this guy. I could just copy all this. Cognitive biases, social dynamics, behavioral. Okay. Yes, yes. This is good. Once again, don't necessarily follow the order that I have these notes in. Okay, no, I should say follow the order or structure. We need to order this in a way that is appropriate given generally following the two rules of low abstraction to high abstraction and innate genetic human to culturally instantiated, cultural, conditioned, learned. And then obviously we finish with the levers for reprogramming. Okay, okay. Yo, Darmanon, what's good? We are so grack. Absolutely. All right. Oh, it's just jumping to it. But let's see what it does. So after that neurobiological foundations of the autopilot, it goes into the evolutionary scripts, innate instincts. So provide immediate behavioral response to survival relevant stimuli. We got pre-attentive processes. Okay, so the first question I'm going to have is like, how difficult would it be to consolidate maybe 1 and 2 here, given that this is all just really low-level stuff? Pre-attentive processes automatically filter sensory input, right? The affect heuristic, semantic marker hypothesis. Then we got social prior, collective automaticity. Humans are, yep. Medic desire and social, okay, in-group, out-group bias, pluralistic ignorance. My concern is that these topics are so intertwined that we might want a different strategy for these subsections. It almost seems like, I should say it somewhat seems, I should get back into the ChatGPT stuff so that I can say this quicker. It somewhat seems that subsection 1 and 2 could be combined, given the fact that a lot of these topics in subsection 2 specifically relate to the mechanisms of subsection 1, but at the same time, subsection 3 similarly talks about processes that are connected to subsection 1, so perhaps it would make sense to combine subsection 2 and 3. Then number 4, we need to make sure that these aren't also conceptually separate from the underlying mechanisms that are actually causing these to happen. And at some point we have to point out where we draw the line in terms of what our science tells us. For example, how do we know what is affecting confirmation bias? Or is this simply just something we notice at the psychological level and we just know that these underlying mechanisms are affecting that outcome, yet we don't know exactly how the underlying mechanisms affect that outcome because it's quite complex? And then similarly with subsection 5, it can't just be that this is a separate domain. We have to point out how personal context involves memory, and then this memory or memory and habit, and then these are actually affecting the mechanisms we previously discussed. So yeah, we need a different strategy for these subsections such that we're allowed to build up from 1 through however many we have, and they all can still make sense in a direction that works. All right, that's the best I could do. Okay. Fun stuff planned for today. Well, depends what you mean by fun. It's going to just be a continuation of yesterday. I think this is going to be, we're in the weeds today trying to learn stuff. And until we switch over to Alex O'Connor and aspect realism and what's my perspective on Neo. I don't know this either, so we can do this in a little bit. And Daniel N, what's good? Stanoscope, the Manoscope. Oh yeah, we're scoping. Grok, is this true? I wouldn't trust Grok with that question. And then strategies for Okay, let's just see what it says after this. To address the interconnected nature of these topics, we should move away from categorical buckets and toward a layered building block strategy. In this approach, each subsection introduces a level of complexity that depends on the one before it, ultimately revealing how a single neural adjudication event is influenced by everything from ancient evolution to this morning's coffee. Here's a proposed strategy for the subsections of automatic behaviors that builds from the hardwired to the malleable. The mechanics of autopilot, neural loops, and energy efficiency. That should be the bottom layer. The evolutionary priors, innate sociality, and survival heuristics. Hell yeah. I like it. And where would something like the somatic marker hypothesis, I'm guessing that would still be in here. Then the systematic bias is how heuristics shape controlled hallucinations. Okay. Building on the evolutionary priors, this subsection addresses the universal shortcuts that affect all human decision making. Oh, this might be where it would show up. But yeah, we got these cognitive misers, confirmation bias, and predictability. Availability heuristic, because confirmation biases are really, I mean, that's right there with our discussion of predictive processing for how fundamental it is. Scientific boundary. Personal context, habits of thought, and malleable predisposition. All right, let's chill out with using our terms here. Memory as a weighting mechanism. Okay, so this is a better direction. Oh, the strategy of intervention. Yep. Okay, can we fit it all in 5? 5 subsections? How did we do in this one? We did 6. Oh, counter. This would be in debiasing, right? Moods and emotions. I don't even know what that would be. And this is getting discussed earlier. Okay. I like this. Let's give the necessary precautions here. So I like this. Is there anything that we are missing? Any topics that we need to add to these subsections? Do you think that these subsections are comprehensive for what we're trying to do in this section? What else should I be thinking about regarding this section? All right, the building block strategy we've outlined is, oh, actually, I should mention that keep in mind that that I'm trying to be as comprehensive as these topics require. As possible with these topics. Want to make sure that they are, I don't know, evenly distributed in some capacity. They're at least somewhat equally distributed. For example, going into all the relevant cognitive biases that people might want to look out for. Perhaps even including how they can leverage their attention to combat these. Want to make sure that, okay. I sound infected. Uh-oh, infected with what? Or like, do I sound sick? Like my throat is rough or something like that. Because I'm actually healthy, but it could just be that I'm using my vocal cords too much. Virus, I reckon it. I don't feel anything. Nah. It could just be that I'm overusing the old the pipes. All right, to achieve true comprehensiveness, there are a few missing links we should integrate into the existing building block structure. These additions ensure that the transition from neurobiology to high-level cognitive biases is seamless and that the distribution of information remains balanced. Additional topics. Knock on wood, true. Affective forecasting and the hot-cold empathy gap. We are remarkably bad at predicting how our future automatic cells will feel or act. Oh, wow. That's actually a really important one. Subsection 4, personal context. Is that what subsection 4 was? Oh, yeah. Okay. Wouldn't that not be the case, though? Oh, I guess it would be part of that. All right, that makes sense. This is right there in the topic of how our memory is very different from the original event. This explains why we set goals while cold, calm, logical, that we fail to keep when we are hot, hungry, stressed, or tired. It connects the biological conditions of the previous section to the inhibition failure of this one. Predictive processing as the unifying theory. The brain isn't just reacting to the world, it is proactively hallucinating a model of it and only paying attention to prediction errors. Right, we can just work this in. Confirmation bias isn't just a quirk, it's the brain trying to minimize prediction errors by ignoring data that doesn't fit the model. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but we'll figure something out. The role of narrative and the interpreter. Okay, so this is actually just giving stuff that we've already talked about. So refined subsection distribution. To ensure an equal distribution of depth, we can expand the biases in social section to match the technical rigor of the neurobiology section. Okay. Oh, is this adding a new subsection? Schema theory. Get out of here. We should categorize the 180 documented biases into functional clusters so the reader isn't overwhelmed but feels the scope is comprehensive. Decision-making biases, probability risk biases, social memory biases. Ah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, we wouldn't want to go into all of them, as long as we make sure that the general idea is there. And then instead of just personal context, this subsection should focus on how memory plus narrative plus trauma create a predispositional shell. How early life creates, okay, for how we automatically interpret social cues. How we automatically defend our self-concept as if it were a physical limb. Yep. Comprehensive checklist for section content. As you write, you should be thinking about these 3 force multipliers. All right, so I think this is just giving me back the stuff I've already given it. So I don't know how much I trust some of this that it's saying. Yeah, this is just... I don't know. I'm gonna have to give myself some time to actually work this into the document and organize it and think about it and write more notes, and then I could come back to using Gemini. I think it's cooked at this point. Yo, stand of the mana, am in your manor. Nice. What is that guy? Brain slug. Hell yeah. Okay, aspect realism. Let's get it. I wanted to actually read this, right? So let's... I'm going to read this document. It seems somewhat complex, so I was hoping you could give the general gist so that I can follow what's being said. This document outlines a philosophical position called aspect realism, which is described as a form of ontological phenomenalism or immaterialism. It seeks to explain how we experience the world without relying on the traditional divide between mind and matter. The following sections break down the core concepts presented in the text. Okay, the definition of an entity. In aspect realism, an object or entity is not a hidden thing behind what we see. Instead, an entity is the logical and temporal synthesis of its various aspects or moments. The aspect metaphor. Just as you cannot see both sides of a coin at once, an object needs time to show itself through different profiles or perspectives. Okay, I think we're actually not going to go into this, just based off of that description. The reason being is, so imagine a coin, you're looking at the coin. The implication with what this is saying is that the coin is still something that is true on both of these sides, and it just takes time to get these different aspects of what it is to fill out the full picture of what it is. I think that's dangerous, because it's still relying on this sense of there's a right amount of information that leads to what the thing actually is, which is not in line with like the Hegelian way we're looking at this, where with the thing in itself, what the thing really is constantly changing, and it's really connected to just the subjective view. It's just the aspect. It's not something that fills. It's not that all aspects build up to this. It would be that the truth is the aspect. Showing is hiding. Because an object is given in aspects that include one another, the act of revealing one side necessarily veils the others. Yeah, I don't think we would benefit from getting these types of constraints. For the aspect realist, these aspects are the real entity rather than merely representations of a hidden physical matter. That's ambiguous, because that sounds exactly like what I just said, but I don't know. Okay, rejection of the mind-matter dualism. Critiques indirect realism, where people believe our minds only hold pictures of an external world. Instead, the author suggests a neutral phenomenal stream as primary, a world streaming that is neither strictly mental nor strictly physical. This playful description suggests that we can experience the world directly without needing a separate mystical entity like a soul or a private mind to hold those experiences. So this is all fine. It's really just the semantics of what constitutes what's real here. And I would just not want to have a system that describes the real as the aggregation of aspects. Before we read aspect realism, can you give your perspective on neo-Lamarckism as it relates to epigenetics? I could do that now, but I think we're probably going to skip past this guy. Okay. To understand neo-Lamarckism in the context of epigenetics, we have to look at how modern biology has revisited the once discarded idea that an organism can pass on traits acquired during its lifetime to its offspring. While classical Darwinism focuses on random mutations and natural selection, neo-Lamarckism suggests that environmental factors can trigger biological changes that are then inherited. how does this work? The weird thing is, like, I don't know how this, like, the genetics would still be unchanged, but you could say that this could be like a, what is it, nurtured nature. Could be the type of thing where that biological change could affect the epigenetic change in the offspring, such that the kid effectively gets that what would be that trait, well, that manifestation of a trait passed down. So original Lamarckism proposed that an animal's actions, like a giraffe stretching its neck, physically altered its body, and those changes were passed down. Yep, this was rejected. So the contemporary revival of this concept, it doesn't claim that stretching your neck makes your kids taller. Rather, it suggests that environmental stress can cause chemical changes in your cells that affect the traits of future generations without changing the DNA sequence itself. Okay, so I'm curious what the mechanism here is. If DNA is hardware, right, epigenetics is the software. Determine which genes are on or off through two primary methods. Right? So DNA methylation, adding a chemical cap to a DNA to silence a gene, and then changing how tightly DNA is wrapped around proteins, making it easier to read, making it easier or harder to read. So epigenetics is affecting whether or not genes are expressed in the moment. We've got chemical caps, and some chemical has to affect how tightly DNA is wrapped. So the link, transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. The bridge between Lamarckism and epigenetics is transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. This occurs when epigenetic marks bypass the reset that usually happens during embryo development. When epigenetic marks bypass the reset that usually happens during embryo development. So I am two concepts removed from what's going on here. I don't know what epigenetic marks are in this case. I don't know what the reset is, but I think we'll pick it up. So how it mimics Lamarckism. An ancestor experiences a specific environment, right, that affects the expression of genes. The body responds by methylating certain genes to optimize metabolism for survival. These tags, what are the tags here, are not wiped clean and are passed to the offspring. The offspring are born with a metabolism preset for famine, even if they live in a time of plenty. Okay. Why it isn't pure. Okay, that's... can you help me understand the mechanism of these tags and how that interacts with the reset that usually happens during embryo development? And then how substantiated is this view? Because if this view isn't substantiated, then that's, you know, we don't even need to learn about these tags. But so I might even just, how substantiated is this view? It's currently in a state of cautious acceptance with heavy skepticism regarding. Yo, welcome. Thank you for the raid. Welcome back, VIP Marissa. We are talking about, yo, Monster Energy, welcome. Thank you for the follow. Sir Legend. That's a nice name. We're just talking about epigenetics, the usual, you know, what most streamers talk about. Okay, so the evidence of this in rodents, the evidence is robust. The study is the gold standard. Feeding a mother specific nutrients can flip a methylation switch that changes her offspring's coat color and disease risk for generations. Crazy. But then the skepticism. In human studies, it is incredibly difficult to prove that a trait was passed via epigenetic tags rather than through shared culture, right? Persistent environmental toxins, there's subtle changes in the microbiome. Wow. So this would be very difficult to find. What's the skepticism, though, here? While reprogramming evasion exists, it is the exception, not the rule. Most biologists view the genome as remarkably stable and resistant to environmental recoding. Oh, okay. The significance as an evolutionary driver is still heavily questioned. Okay, I think that's worth looking into then. Cautious acceptance sounds like a grand overstatement. Yeah, it's tricky. Like the fact that it's found in mice is huge, but yeah, I mean, perhaps the distinction here is like what we're able to use with this, and maybe that's where it really matters whether or not we commit to it being true or not comes into play. I don't think it's going to matter for us, but I am kind of curious how this would work. So what are these tags? Epigenetic tags, specifically DNA methylation, act like molecular volume knobs. So these chemicals are actually affecting our DNA, right? And they would have to persist into, I guess, whatever the, if you're a guy, it would be sperm and I guess an egg for a female, and so like the DNA in the what are those called? Like what's the general term for both of those? But I guess those molecules would have to stay on the DNA while they're still there, such that by the time that this DNA gets to the embryo, it's still tagged in that same way. So when a cluster of these tags appears at the promoter region of a gene, it physically blocks the cellular machinery, right? These tags don't just float, they recruit proteins that shrink wrap the DNA, locking the gene away in a storage-like state. The question would be, for the discussion of these tags, how persistent are they? My understanding was that epigenetics could affect genes in a range of time scales from second to second all the way to lifetime. Is it the case that the tag is so persistent that it is still there even after conception, affecting the development of the offspring? Also, wouldn't it be quite difficult to make out what the affected genes would affect in terms of traits, given that epigenetics is a rather granular, dynamic process? Okay. Dawkins gave Noble a hard time about this, if I remember correctly. Noble is who's Noble here? Who's fronting this? All right, the barrier, epigenetic reprogramming. In most cases, the sins of the father are washed away during two major waves of reprogramming. This is the reset you mentioned, and it is the primary reason why classical Lamarckism was rejected. Gametogenesis. As sperm and egg cells develop in the parent, most epigenetic tags are stripped away to ensure the germ cells are blank slates. Okay. That answers some of my questions. Early embryogenesis. Shortly after fertilization, a second wave of demethylation occurs. The embryo clears out the remaining parental signatures so its cells can become totipotent, able to turn into any cell type. Nice. How neo-Lamarckism leaks through. Certain genes must undergo reprogramming evasion. Some regions of the genome, specifically imprinted genes and certain retrotransposons, possess DNA sequences that resist these waves of clearing. If an environmental stressor like toxins or starvation hits one of these escapee regions, the tag survives the reset and is present in every cell of the offspring. Wow. Okay. So I'll still ask my question even though it answered most of those questions. Dennis Noble, a biologist with no credentials in evolutionary biology as far as I know. Oh, is he the only one who's pushing this? Because that would make me feel a little more cautious with my acceptance. All right, epigenetic changes are not a monolithic lock on the genome. They exist on a spectrum ranging from fleeting cellular responses to multi-generational legacies. So we can skip that. For a tag to affect an offspring, it must be meiotically stable. It isn't just still there by accident. It has to actively evade the enzymes whose sole job is to strip those tags away. It would be crazy if there was some sort of Darwinism happening in subsets of our genes. I'm sure that's going to be a science in like 20 years. Where like these types of I mean I guess that's already a science. Like I think we require a certain amount of bacteria, and we think about bacteria as a separate thing evolving in its own way, but it's co-evolving with living things in such a way that yeah, we're pretty coupled. I haven't heard of anyone else talking about this, but it's certainly possible. I don't really care much for biology unless grand claims are made. Okay. Well, then, yeah, I probably won't. If that's the case, then I probably won't run too far with this thing. You asked if the tag is persistent enough to survive conception in 99% of the genome. The answer is no. The reset is incredibly efficient. All right, I'm actually now most curious about the last question I gave. So there's the leaking through. The mapping problem, granularity versus traits. You raised a point about granularity. If epigenetics is dynamic and affects thousands of sites, how do we link one tag to a trait like anxiety or metabolic rate? This is the grand challenge of modern epigenetics. You are right to be skeptical. It is extremely difficult to map for 3 reasons. Signal to noise. If you sequence the methylome of someone who experienced a famine, you might find 50,000 different differentially methylated regions. Most of these are likely noise, random fluctuations, or secondary effects rather than the driver of the trait. Pleiotropy, or tropy, a single gene silenced by a tag might do 10 different things. Silencing a growth-related gene in the liver might affect height, but silencing it in the brain might affect behavior. And then contextual logic, a tag's meaning changes depending on the developmental stage. All right, how scientists try to solve this. They use epigenome-wide association studies. Instead of looking at one tag, they use massive computing power to find clusters of tags that consistently appear in individuals. So they're just using machine learning here. Right, so you would have to find these types of patterns in offspring before I think you're allowed to start saying that this is true. So yeah, I think we gotta chill out for now. I mean, we don't know that it's not true It's just we gotta. I don't think we should cautiously accept. I think we should cautiously be cautious. All right, are we back to it? Are we back to consciousness discussions? Can we actually make some headway in this call? Not call this. I guess it's their call.
It's rather for me.
How do we know what the mind is?
It's a fair enough question, I suppose, because I think it might help bring out the contrast a little bit better. Can you give an example of something that you think we do have a description of what it is, just so like we can bring out this contrast between what something is and what it does?
Unfortunately, this is where it seems to get a bit question beggy. But to clarify, as a throat clearing, the reason why I'm bringing this up is not to say there's some kind of gap with physics and let's plug it in with consciousness. It's rather for me to point out, like, to make a sort of cumulative case, that it seems to me that if you actually want to know with certainty what a thing actually is, there might only actually be one such thing in the universe, which is phenomenology, which is experience, right? And to the extent, and it's kind of like this polarization is so interesting because the stuff that you can mathematize, like mass and charge and all that kind of stuff, is the stuff that you sort of don't know what it is. But the stuff that you do know what it is the stuff that you can't like mathematize and scientifically describe. So famously, people have spent a long time trying to scientifically account for or describe phenomenological experience and failed. And yet, if I ask you what it like is to experience, you know what I'm talking about. You don't just know what your experience like sort of does. You don't just know that like when you see the color red, you associate it with stop. You don't just know that. You know what it's like to experience redness. You just know that directly, right? As direct experience. And so when you ask, is there something that we know?
And it's like a good question as to what we mean by know in that sense, because a lot of people do think about knowledge as just facts, but that type of knowledge is, or the type of knowledge he's talking about, is something so experiential, just grasping like the feel of it. And I think that the feel of it is more fundamental, which is why in the document we start with that whole phenomenology of meaning. The experience of meaning, covering that whole space of phenomenology.
Know for what it is. I think any kind of phenomenological experience, that is, you know, anything you hear, anything you see, anything you touch, anything you feel, any kind of emotional state that you can only best describe through analogy and poetry, that is you interacting with something as it is. And that's the very reason why we struggle so much to put it into descriptive words, because you know that's just when you experience something so directly, especially if that's kind of the only way it can be known, it's very difficult to communicate that to another person who doesn't already know what you're talking about. Like I can tell you that my jeans are blue, and you'll know what I'm talking about, but only because you've also had that private isness of the experience of blue. Trivially, if I tried to tell a blind person that my jeans were blue, they would say, okay, what does that mean? And if you ask blind people how they understand color, they're like, well, I kind of think I get it, because people talk about how like it's associated with sadness and how the ocean is blue and stuff like that, but they don't know what it is. And they kind of start to sound a little bit like a scientist. You know, they tell you the effect that blueness has in the world without being able to tell you what it is, because they're in the same position as the scientists, which is to say, you know, interacting in a world in which they are blind to the nature of the thing itself. I think that's what the scientist is doing in describing the world with mathematics. Mathematics is an epistemology without eyes. You know, it just can't see the world. You know, I was talking to my friend about this the other day, and he said, I guess it just doesn't really add up. And I was like, no, it does add up. It just doesn't do anything else. That's the best way that I can characterize this. So the reason why I smirked when you asked that question is because from an outside perspective, it seems like I'm coming in saying like, you know, consciousness must be something not reducible to scientific explanation because science can't explain what things are. And then it's like, yeah, but okay, but when does anything, when can you know what anything actually is? And I go, oh, well, consciousness. And it sounds sort of weirdly circular. But for me, it sort of went the other way around. I started with the recognition that science can't tell me what anything is. And then I'm like, but hold on, there is something I do know what it is. So if I can't describe that with scientific language, then what can I describe it with? And that's not to say that it's like, that consciousness has to be some kind of mystical, spooky, supernatural thing. It's just to say that specifically the language of the scientific revolution, the language of mathematics and physics and chemistry and biology and stuff isn't going to be able to capture it. Which similarly, you know, you wouldn't be able to capture, I don't know, the rules of chess in the language of music theory, right? And that's not a surprise because they're doing different things, you know. But if you decided that the entire world can be described in terms of music theory, and then you couldn't explain the rules of chess, here are your options. Either you say, well, I guess the rules of chess just can't exist. Or you say that somehow the rules of chess do exist, but they must be like reducible to music theory. in some completely unimaginable and baffling manner, or you just admit that you're wrong, that everything can be explained in terms of music theory, right? And I think that's the position we're in. People either have to say that consciousness, like, this doesn't exist, it's an illusion, which I think is just unthinking, literally, or they say that consciousness is by some way reducible to physical stuff, which, never say never or anything, but I just cannot see how that could be the case. Or you just admit that you're wrong, that everything can be reducible to a scientific explanation, and yet consciousness abounds.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So
does that make any sense?
Or it's like trying to taste a recipe or whatever I said in that video. Whatever Gemini came up that I thought was golden. We don't have to. I'm gonna just like actually continue. I keep talking after every little bit that they say, and I think I would just be saying the same stuff. So I'm gonna just continue on this one.
Reductionism, illusionism, or a third way, which I suppose would either be dualism or some kind of panpsychism.
Yeah, I suppose so. Or like idealism.
Yes. Yeah. But when you say idealism, are you talking about like a kind of transcendental idealism, whereby our experience is framed by categories in a kind of Kantian sense, or do you mean like a kind of, because you talked about like analytic idealism before?
Mm-hmm.
I just
I don't
really understand
trigger words.
Kant's distinction between the phenomena and the noumena is really useful and instructive here, but I don't think we land in this.
Energy Dompter, you missed it all. I think I might actually. I haven't done this before, but I really should do this. The YouTube channel saves all these VODs, and I think for the sake of just moving forward, I'll refer to that. But we talked about it for a good 20 minutes.
The same place as him. But then I don't know very much about Kant, so I say that with great care. The term analytical idealism is one that I'm sort of, I want to say I borrowed from, but it is just the worldview of Bernardo Kastrup, who's an interesting guy. I mean, he's got a lot of a fascinating attack on materialism, and relatively controversial. Like when I did a show with him, half of the audience were like, "This is awesome. We love Bernardo. This is so interesting." And half of them were like, "Who is this guy?" It's like I had Deepak Chopra on or something, and it's really interesting to see. But I've got a lot of time for his views. But idealism, I guess, comes in many forms. Like idealism is broadly speaking the view that the universe is made out of mind. It's made out of like mental stuff. And there are a few ways you could cash that out, right? Like, you could be some kind of solipsist who believes that the whole universe kind of exists inside of your head. Right? That's not a view that I agree with. Certainly not that it all exists inside of your head. There's also a kind of like
I would think that if we're going to take a view where, like, if we're going to take an analytic idealist direction, I think we have to either go solipsism or we go what we just talked about yesterday, which was the relational quantum mechanics, because at least that makes more sense regarding this sense of the universe being constructed by this view of relative perspective, where literally the universe as we experience it, the one that we're living in, the physical world that we're experiencing, is constituted by this relative entanglement. Like, I think that makes that's a nicer way of thinking about the connections here than if it were somehow like consciousness is piecing everything together. Now, if we were to go like the world is created by our mind, then I think you have to go full solipsism. There's no like in between. I'd rather go one or the other of those two things I just mentioned. Please correct me if I'm mistaken, Howard. In my understanding, your perspective is neo-Lamarckism in relation to epigenetics is something we should be cautious about. However, shouldn't be dismissed entirely as an idea. However, it's not relevant for the document. I think that was actually pretty well said. Yeah, it's that given what we know about whether or not it was substantiated for humans yet, we're not allowed to say that it's definitely a thing. Given that we know that the person behind it isn't like highly regarded necessarily in the field, we have to be cautious of that. But that doesn't mean that it's definitely wrong. It's just that, we're not allowed to say it's a thing. But in conclusion, I don't think it is relevant for the document. I don't think that's helping people understand these things, unless you can find that there's really important patterns of this type of neo-Lamarckism affecting certain types of traits, such that it would be really important for you to be healthy because then your kid's going to be healthier, or something like that.
Like Berkeley's most associated with idealism historically, I suppose, in the early modern period, where he just sort of started to notice that you can't really separate out your idea of a thing from the thing itself. Like you can't sort of you can't like imagine a tree that nobody is imagining, because as soon as you're imagining it, you're imagining it. He started to realize that, you can't really see something without sort of having the experience of seeing it, and they're very connected in an important way. And basically he ends up concluding that, like stuff really only exists in so long as it's being like perceived by a mind, which I think today sounds a little bit...
I mean, that would be good and all if there was evidence for such a thing, like for such a lever that kids can leverage, right? Like we don't know if it's even true yet for humans. Like we're just playing in the dark. What's throwing something in the dark? Playing darts in the dark. We are fishing in the dark. Yeah, that's as akin to manifesting just by thinking about things. Like just tell kids, hey, just manifest. And then it'll happen. Like you don't have to do anything, just manifest it, It's like similarly substantiated. Now, I guess you could argue that manifesting does actually help you because it actually affects your mind when you think about certain things. It affects the possibilities that become clear to you. So, manifesting is actually not a net zero. And then similarly, perhaps this exercise that I think you're pointing out is one that's hopeful and also points you in a direction that might actually make it more likely that you manifest those outcomes. But the underlying mechanism is not there. So we might as well just talk about the actual mechanism involved, which would be something like thinking about things. Manifesting actually makes more sense to talk about within the document than this type of Lamarckism.
Woo-woo, and I don't really like the way that is presented. But of course, there are some obvious objections to this view. Like, well, if the universe needs to be like perceived in order to exist, and some people have tried to this is the Deepak Chopra thing, trying to resurrect it by saying, well, quantum mechanics tells us that if no one's observing the moon, then the moon is just this like sort of cloud of quantum mush. It's not really how it works, but that is kind of where the Copenhagen interpretation will lead people to think. That's what Schrödinger's cat's about, by the way. Like one of my favorite misconceptions in the history of science is that Schrödinger's cat is both dead and alive. Schrödinger came up with this example in order to show how ridiculous the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is. Like Schrödinger sort of comes along, sees this idea that like, it's all sort of probabilistically true at once. So until I observe it, I build this system, and until I open the box, the cat is both dead and alive. Really, that's what you think.
Well, yeah, if you went the many worlds direction, then the cat is both dead and alive, just in different universes. All right, I believe it's relevant for... Okay, never mind. I read that.
And it's just sort of embedded into pop culture as like, that's what Schrödinger really thought. It was a reductio ad absurdum. Anyway, that's a footnote. I can't remember why I brought it up either. I can't remember what I was talking about.
You're talking about...
Something about, idealism. So,
yeah.
So Berkeley is like, okay, so things need to be observed in order to exist. And one famous sort of counterexample to this is the melting candle, right? If I have a candle in a room and I light it on fire and I leave, when I come back in an hour's time, it will have melted. And so it seems like it must have existed even though no one was in the room to observe it. And Berkeley's response to this is that well, it was being observed by God. And that, so he sort of has, I guess your minor premise, or your first premise would be like, things can only exist in so long as they're being observed. Your second premise might be something like, some things exist without being observed by any earthly creatures. Therefore, there must be some non-earthly perceiver of all things, and that's God. So there's also this view of idealism that the universe exists sort of in the mind of God. So you've got an idealism where the universe is inside of your head. There's like an idealism where the universe is kind of inside the mind of God, and we're kind of in there somewhere. Bernardo Kastrup's analytic idealism is kind of neither of these. He just thinks that the stuff the universe is made out of is mentality, is like mental states. Okay. Not the mental states of anybody, but just that the kind of things they are or the kind of stuff that it is just mental. And it's
Yeah, you know what? If we're talking about the universe in terms of perhaps like the set of all meaning as experienced, then it would, that would be right. It would be that the entire domain of ontology is within this mental space. Granted, within this domain we have understandings about what the physical world could be, and this is another cool connection to the relational quantum mechanics. I think you could actually have a really strong union between the relational quantum mechanics and analytic idealism. I gotta look this up. Has anyone created a union with analytic idealism and relational quantum mechanics? These seem like a nice complement. I'll just say that and see what it says. Am I into super determinism? If so, the Schrodinger stuff isn't that interesting. Super determinism. What are we? Super determinism. Oh no. Means that there is no such thing as independent variable. Without independent variables, that process falls apart. By postulating that all systems being measured are correlated with the choices of which measurements to make on them, the assumptions of the theorem are no longer fulfilled. Ooh. I don't know if I understand this well enough. To me, it sounds like relational quantum mechanics would necessitate some sort of superdeterminism, I'd imagine. I could spend more time with that in a second here. The synergy you've noticed is increasingly being explored by philosophers and physicists who are dissatisfied with traditional physicalism, while the founders of relational quantum mechanics, like Ravelli, often lean toward a naturalist, physicalist interpretation. Several recent frameworks have explicitly attempted to marry RQM with analytic idealism. We were talking about relational quantum dynamics, right? Or were we talking about relational quantum mechanics? Whoa. Okay, the most formal union to date is a framework called relational quantum dynamics, which emerged in recent years. It takes the core tenet of RQM, that physical variables only acquire values relative to an interaction, and reinterprets those interactions as acts of awareness. Instead of saying a particle has a position relative to a stone, it posits that the interaction is a primitive moment of awareness. The relations are the way the universe substrate of mind, as proposed in analytic idealism, interacts with its own internal segments. Okay, so I don't like that. So right off the bat, we have to keep these separate still. I think that these are still good complements. Like analytic idealism is a nice complement still, because now when we're talking about analytic idealism, we could just talk about the anything ontological, so anything having to do with meaning as people experience it, and then we could use RQM as a tool that we leverage within this experience of meaning to just make sense of how the laws of physics work, which doesn't necessitate some absolute physical grounding. Now, that being said, perhaps it doesn't say that there's no physical grounding. So I think analytic idealism is still short-sighted in that regard. Bernardo Kastrup himself frequently cites RQM and cubism, quantum Bayesianism, as the most empirically responsible interpretations of physics. Kastrup argues that RQM's rejection of absolute mind-independent states perfectly matches his claim that the physical world is a dashboard representation, a set of appearances of an underlying mental process. So yeah, it would be that case though. You know, any type of interpretation we have about the physical universe, including the ones that we see within our own consciousness. Well, actually, I guess I was going to say are obviously subjective in the sense that, that we experience them in consciousness. So obviously what we experience in consciousness is experienced in consciousness, but the point being that all of our physics have this type of relativism that is captured by relational quantum mechanics. Yet relational quantum mechanics is a more broad discussion where all matter can act as the subject of the relation. And we just happen to be in this point where our conscious experience is one that seems to be relational. Like we have this understanding. So I don't think that Bernardo gets out, like I don't think he proves his own framework via RQM, and I don't think RQM necessitates analytic idealism either. Bitbol's phenomenological bridge, while not a union in a formal mathematical sense, the French philosopher Bitbol serves as the primary academic bridge. He interprets RQM through a neo-Kantian phenomenological lens, argues that relations are actually descriptions of our epistemic access to the world. But yeah, this is also grounding this towards us. Like, I don't think it matters. RQM is a broader topic than just our view of things. By removing the view from nowhere, Bitbol, because yeah, the math is still describing something that's separate from us. Conceptually, right? Like conceptually, it's not the thing that is perceiving that this math is capturing. So RQM is a way to still think about relativism in that physical space, such that there wouldn't be the absolute physical truth, ground truth, but there's still physical matter that's constituting these relations. Okay, it's basically just the idea that the free choices variables, free will, in other words, Bell's third premise of his theorem, are actually determined. I'm quite partial, but I also don't understand quantum mechanics. All right, let me give this a second of thought here. Can you briefly explain superdeterminism? It's a fringe but mathematically consistent interpretation of quantum mechanics. It suggests that the universe is entirely deterministic in a way that eliminates statistical independence. The idea that experimenters can choose their measurement settings independently of the particles being measured. So it eliminates the idea that experimenters can choose their measurement settings independent of the particles being measured. The problem Bell's theorem proves that no local hidden variable theory can reproduce the predictions of quantum physics. This usually leaves us with two uncomfortable options: non-locality or indeterminate. Oh, so my understanding is that some interpretations of quantum physics gets around the problem. So I'm gonna say many worlds, RQM. Superdeterminism provides a third, albeit radical option. It suggests that the measurement settings and the state of the particle are both determined by the same starting conditions at the beginning of the universe. Okay, then how do these differ from superdeterminism? No free will in physics. That would be something I'm down with. Locality is preserved. It allows physics to remain local. Conspiracy theory. Critics often call it conspiratorial because it requires every part of the universe to be perfectly synchronized to trick us into seeing quantum effects. So if I were to guess, I'm going to guess that this is actually quite commensurate with RQM, and perhaps not commensurate with many worlds, but maybe commensurate. Bell's theorem essentially is a trilemma, right? There's locality. This is spooky action at a distance. We got realism or definiteness. Objects have definite properties before they are measured. So this might be the one that RQM says I don't care about. And then we've got statistical independence, the free choice loophole. Experimenters can choose their settings independently of their particles. Here's how the interpretations navigate that choice. Many worlds gets around the problem by rejecting the idea of a single outcome. In a Bell test, Bell's theorem assumes that if you measure a particle, it results in one specific up or down result. Many worlds argues that the wave function never collapses. Instead, the universe branches. You see up in one branch and another version of you sees down in another. How it differs from superdeterminism. Many worlds is deterministic, but it preserves statistical independence. The experimenter's choice is free relative to the particle, but both are part of a massive branching wave. Right. You keep locality, but you sacrifice the unicity of reality. So it is still deterministic. Relational quantum mechanics takes a different route by rejecting absolutism. Is that the realism here? It suggests that the state of a system is not an objective property of the system itself, but is only real relative to another system. In a Bell test, the correlation between two particles isn't a thing that exists in a vacuum. It is a description of how those particles interact with specific observers. Now, for like pragmatically, when we are within this system, first of all, we're not necessarily the observer, but we are entangled with the observer, such that we would still see one outcome. So that would lend itself the view that the wave function has collapsed, or that we are on one of these universes, one of these many worlds. So RQM doesn't claim the experimenter's choice was predetermined by the Big Bang. It simply says that the paradox of Bell's theorem only arises if you assume there is an absolute perspective of the universe. Right, but it might actually, wouldn't it also do the other? Wouldn't it also claim that the, yeah, actually that's a good question. Can't RQM also claim the experimenter choice was predetermined by the Big Bang? Although it is unaware of this entanglement. Okay, so you keep locality, but you sacrifice objective realism. There is no observer independent view from nowhere. Superdeterminism places the weirdness in the initial conditions. It says the universe is a single unfolding clockwork where your choice. So yeah, I guess many worlds is pretty commensurate with that view, except it's multiple worlds of superdeterminism. But I'm wondering where the nuance is here. Technically, you could attempt to fuse the two, but doing so would fundamentally change what relational quantum mechanics is trying to achieve. We distinguish between causal determinism, things happen because of prior causes, and superdeterminism, the specific loophole where measurement settings are correlated with the particle. Okay. So I think it would be the case that we wouldn't want to think about entanglement in that same way. Nature of information. In RQM, physical reality is defined by the information systems have about one another through interaction. Okay. my difficulty understanding the understanding RQM pragmatically is that isn't what should I say here? Isn't anything that we can perceive of within the universe, I don't know, perceive as the, can measure within the universe necessarily entangled? Would that not have been entangled with the Big Bang, regardless of whether we interpret this entanglement as relativistic? Interpret, I should say, this entanglement in the science we leverage within the system, within the entangled, is relativistic. I guess obviously you can create separate systems that aren't entangled, but for the most part, wouldn't everything that we kind of just see out in the universe be entangled necessarily? If you claim the experimenter's choice was predetermined and correlated with the particle, you aren't really doing RQM. Oh, I see. So do we have to get rid of RQM now? RQM is built on the idea that there's no absolute description of the universe. This wouldn't be to say there is an absolute description of the universe. Oh, is the description in this case the wave function would be the description, so there would be no, but we could arrive at a wave function that describes the universe from a perspective. I don't know. I'm gonna just throw this up there. I'm not convinced superdeterminism requires the hidden variable stuff, but I could be wrong. Seems weird for Gemini to state it as a part of it. Yeah, Gemini could be getting stuff from all over the place. Who knows where it's coming up with its explanations here. Okay, and the universal wave function, right. Your intuition is, okay, if everything has a common origin and interacts, then everything is, in a technical sense, entangled. However, RQM and superdeterminism treat that universal entanglement in fundamentally different ways. So the perspective problem. You suggested we could arrive at a wave function that describes the universe from a perspective. RQM's most radical claim is that the universe has no perspective on itself, right? In RQM, a wave function is not a physical object or a cloud of probability floating in space. It is a bookkeeping tool used by one system to describe its knowledge of another system. Okay, so I'm going to say, right, we use the wave function knowing that it does not describe the universe in some holistic way, especially since we can decouple I don't know, quantum processes. However, much of the world that we interact in, perceive and interact in, would be entangled. So effectively, it wouldn't make much of a difference pragmatically. Yet, of course, we would still want to leverage RQM in order to describe to make sense of all the quantum interactions, behaviors that we've identified. Like spooky action. I'm just kind of throwing things at a wall at this point. This is a little above my pay grade. All right. In RQM, a wave function is not a physical object or a cloud. Okay, we talked about that. The problem, to have a wave function of the universe, you would need an observer outside the universe to whom that information is relative. Okay. Since there is no outside, there's no universal wave function. There's only a massive interlocking web of relative facts. Right? Okay. You are right that everything is technically entangled via the Big Bang, but in physics, we distinguish between weak entanglement and statistical independence, the ability to perform a clean experiment. So the superdeterministic view, it claims that entanglement from the Big Bang is so precise and conspiratorial that it specifically correlates your brain's neurons with the particle's spin. Right? That sounds right, but RQM acknowledges a common past, but argues that decoherence effectively breaks that entanglement for all practical purposes. Think of it like a deck of cards. Even if the cards were printed in the same factory, once you shuffle them thoroughly, the position of the ace of spades is statistically independent of what the factory worker had for lunch that day. Okay, I don't like that metaphor, but RQM assumes that the shuffling of the universe, entropy, and complexity makes the experimenter's choice independent of the particle's state, even if they share a distant ancestor in the Big Bang. The pragmatic difficulty is it just superdeterminism. If you insist that the Big Bang dictates the measurement choice in a way that bypasses Bell's theorem, you are by definition a superdeterminist. Okay. Perhaps I'm wondering whether this deck of cards metaphor holds up. What would shuffling cards be in this case? That metaphor, if someone what would be the, if someone could perceive minute movements and perhaps record and watch back the shuffling, they would be able to know exactly where the cards end up. Shuffling, causing novelty, requires an impoverished observer. In this case, even following RQM, the observer would be privileged. Okay. I might just be making stuff up now. Actually, God did the Big Bang. Ah, damn, you're right. I don't even know why we're doing this. The reason RQM doesn't follow you there is pragmatic realism. Okay, if you insist the pragmatic difficulty is... Okay, if you insist the Big Bang dictates that... Okay, then you're a super determinist. If we assume our choices are always rigged by the Big Bang, we can no longer trust the scientific method. We would never know if a drug works or if the universe is just tricking us into seeing a correlation. What the hell? Isn't that what we're looking for? Locality without conspiracy. RQM wants to keep physics local without... I'm just going to skip past that one. You really should read the Bible before you started working on this. It has most of the answers. We might need to read the Bible for part 3. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's something we have to go into, or maybe that's something we do after the fact. At some point, we should watch those Jordan Peterson Bible lectures. Those, I'm always pretty stoked about those when I read them, or when I watch those. Okay. Is the classic argument for determinism. You are essentially saying that randomness is just a name for our own ignorance, but that if we had the God's eye view, the privileged observer, then the shuffling wouldn't matter because the sequence of events is unbroken from the Big Bang. Let's break down why RQM resists this and what shuffling actually means in a quantum context. What is decoherence? In a quantum system, this isn't just a lack of information. It's a physical process of a system interacting with its environment. When a quantum particle interacts with a macroscopic environment, its phase information leaks out into trillions of other particles. To reconstruct the original state, you would need to track every single photon and atom in the room. Yeah. Pragmatically, RQM treats this as a loss of correlation. Why? Even if the universe is deterministic in a broad sense, the specific correlation required to break Bell's theorem, connecting your brain's choice to a particular particle's spin, is buried under so much noise that it becomes physically inaccessible. Okay. So is Bell's theorem... So is Bell's theorem only pragmatic related to an experiment? To a human instituted experiment? And not a way to think about the world at large? I don't think we should entertain this idea of decoherence just because it is effectively noisy. My initial understanding was that even in RQM, the relative observer, which doesn't have to be a human being, and it would be inappropriate to think that human consciousness has some privileged status as an observer. Could be any matter. Which would be entangled. Necessarily so. Okay. I can't tell if Gemini is glutamating or I am. And Gemini might be glutamating. We'll see. So the RQM view, there's no such thing as a privileged observer. In fact, RQM explicitly denies that a complete description of the universe exists independent of an interaction. That said, just because an observer, a relative observer, has complete view of the system with which it is entangled, and it wouldn't be right to think of one privileged observer within this system. Rather, all the entangled matter can be viewed as the observer. What was I even trying to say that here? Just because a relative observer has a complete view of the system with which it is entangled, that doesn't mean it knows the entire universe. Actually, maybe it does. Considering that humans can create a decohered system. I think. Maybe they can't. Maybe the act of a human setting up this type of... No, I think we can create decohered systems, right? Isn't that like a... Isn't that what we do for experiments, or is that technically not perfectly decoupled? I'll just leave it there. Okay, why RQM is anti-superdeterministic. The reason it doesn't see the Big Bang as a rigged deck is because of how it defines information. In superdeterminism, the information about the measurement is hidden in the initial conditions. In RQM, information is created during the interaction. Really, I'm trying to start with RQM and just kind of go backwards. Like currently, we can see RQM as being a thing, but then going backwards, you would still have entanglement with stuff from the Big Bang. So, yeah, in my mind, it's like RQM is a way of thinking about these things. And now, granted, we could talk about the Big Bang as like constituting, I don't know, some sort of truth. But you know, as I'm trying to point out, we can create things that are separated from that truth. So in my mind, we can view the world through, I shouldn't say the world. We can view quantum mechanics through a RQM lens fundamentally, but that seems, but given our understanding of entanglement, we must acknowledge that much of the system within which we operate and measure is already entangled with the Big Bang. But I'm starting two sentences next to each other with but. That doesn't mean that the entire universe is entangled. Is this a cogent take at all? In RQM, information is created during the interaction. This is a very Hegelian view, actually. Like information is determined through this interaction. It's like determinate information in that regard. Now, it's obviously not leveraging the type of relations that Hegel talks about, but it's analogous, I should say. Saying the outcome was determined at the Big Bang is a meaningless statement because that information wasn't relative to anyone until the measurement happened. I see. The verdict, logic versus reality. Your difficulty with RQM is shared by many who prefer a realist interpretation. If you believe that the universe has a true state regardless of who is looking at it, RQM will always feel like a dodge or an impoverished view. However, from a strictly logical, evidence-based standpoint, superdeterminism is unfalsifiable. If every experiment is rigged, you can never prove it's rigged because the proof itself would be rigged. And then the consensus, most physicists reject the privileged observer because it leads back to absolute space and time, which Einstein's relativity and RQM argues against. You are effectively arguing for a deterministic hidden variable theory. The price you pay for that is accepting that the universe is a conspiracy where every measurement choice... Okay, so maybe it's the case that relativity... So is relativity necessarily... does relativity necessarily contradict this view? Okay, quantum Bayesianism, which I think we've talked about before. It takes your idea of the impoverished observer even further, arguing that the wave function is strictly a map of an observer's personal beliefs or expectations. Oh, man. This is too much. Okay, I don't like this usage of a hidden. I think determined is more precise to me. But I guess it's to keep in line with Bell's semantics. Okay, you're touching on the global versus local wave function debate that sits at the very edge of modern physics, philosophy of physics. To address the question directly, the take is cogent, but it leads to a specific flavor of quantum mechanics that most physicists try to avoid because of its implications for locality. Here's the breakdown of your logic and where it hits the relativity wall. Okay, so yeah, I'm guessing that all these intuitions are still... I mean, if we have this relativity problem, then we have to drop all these intuitions. You know, we have to just jump ship. You asked if Bell's theorem is only for human experiments. In a sense, no. Bell's theorem is a mathematical constraint on any theory that assumes local realism. If you believe that information cannot travel faster than light, particles have definite states before they are measured, and the settings of an interaction aren't pre-coordinated, then Bell's theorem says your theory cannot produce the results we see in nature. If you want to believe the universe is a predetermined entangled web from the Big Bang, you are effectively choosing to kill 3 to save 1 and 2. This isn't just a human issue. It's a statement about the logical structure of any possible world. Okay. The universal entanglement versus RQM. In RQM, an observer is just any physical system. Consciousness is irrelevant. However, there is a subtle but massive difference between entanglement and correlation. Everything is entangled with the Big Bang, so everything is correlated. Therefore, the measurement and the particle are already in on the secret. Ah, okay. But the RQM take is, even if two things have a common ancestor, they do not share information until they interact. If you assume the entanglement from the Big Bang is strong enough to dictate the outcomes of specific quantum experiments today, you are essentially arguing for holism, the idea that you cannot describe any part of the universe without describing the whole universe. Okay. Yeah, I would like to think of it almost like you can't fully describe any part of the universe without describing the whole universe, but perhaps that's the same thing. That's probably what's meant here. Okay. Does relativity contradict this? This is where relativity wall comes in. Relativity relies on locality, the idea that what happens here cannot instantly depend on what happens there. If the entire universe is a single pre-entangled system where the Big Bang coordinates every interaction, then you lose local causality. If my choice to measure a particle here was set by the Big Bang to match a particle in the Andromeda galaxy, then the cause of my measurement is not local to me. It's a global property of the entire space-time manifold. Conflict. General relativity treats spacetime as a background where events happen. If you link every event via a Big Bang script, you aren't necessarily breaking the math of relativity, but you are rendering the speed of light limit somewhat trivial. The information didn't need to travel because it was already there at every point in space since t equals 0. Okay. Yeah. It's essentially absolute determinism. Spinozan determinism. AO. It is cogent, but it is not RQM. RQM says the particle has no state until it interacts with me. Your take says the particle and I were already part of the same state since the Big Bang, and our interaction is just playing out that state. Your view is actually closer to superdeterminism or a very hard version of de Broglie-Bohm pilot wave theory, which I think we let go of yesterday, but where there is a universal wave function that guides everything. Okay. The scientific consensus leads away from your view, not because it's wrong, but because it's sterile. If we assume everything is a preset result of the Big Bang, we lose the ability to say X caused Y. Instead, we have to say the Big Bang Theory caused X and Y simultaneously. Explains everything, and therefore, in a weird way, explains nothing. Okay. I'm not married to any of these. Right now, my intuition puts many worlds, RQM, and super determinism as the ones I'm most interested in. In my understanding, these are interpretations of the same measured behaviors following each might provide different hypotheses, etc. Pushback equals wow, I want my free will. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, like how much of this pushback is just I want my free will. Also, I think even with RQM, you would still see free will. You would still see loss of free will regarding mechanisms in the brain and elsewhere. How can I effectively navigate between these? Okay. The best way to navigate these is to view them as different solutions to an information problem. Each interpretation accepts the math of quantum mechanics but chooses a different sacrifice to keep the logic consistent. To navigate them, you should ask, which fundamental assumption am I most willing to give up? Awesome. Okay. The sacrifice framework. Think of these as think of these three as a trilemma. Okay, so it's giving me the same sacrifice here. You could have a local deterministic and realist universe, but you have to pick which classical pillar to knock down to make the quantum math work. Okay. What you lose. Quantum, okay, many worlds. What do we lose? Counterfactual definiteness. You lose the idea that there is only one outcome. That is fine. I don't mind that. RQM, absolute objectivity. You lose the idea of a view from nowhere. Facts are relative. That's fine, depending on what that implies about, I guess, maybe subsequent measurements. Okay. What does RQM say about subsequent measurements? Perhaps involving a system that wouldn't have been able to decohered. And then, most importantly, what constitutes the system being sufficiently decohered? Okay, it's so weird because sterile is usually a good thing, but this theory has been hated for a long time based on what seems like emotions. Well, in science sterile is can certainly be bad in some situations. Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to I'm trying to appreciate the differences here, but perhaps I don't appreciate the pragmatic ramifications. So the benefit, what you keep for many worlds, is you keep determinism and locality. The wave function is real and follows a strict equation, no spooky action. RQM, you lose the idea of a view from nowhere, facts are relative, and you keep locality, physical interactions are local, there is no universal wave function collapsing instantly. Okay. See, I might have misunderstood how this is operating. But, okay, superdeterminism, statistical independence. You lose the idea that we can perform independent experiments. Okay, that's fine. That's totally chill. Local realism. You keep the classical world exactly as it is, but everything is rigged. Yeah, you know what? I find that fine as well. The logic-based critique. To navigate them with rigor, look at the strongest argument against each one. Awesome. Against many worlds, it is ontologically extravagant. To explain one electron, you must posit an infinite number of universes. Not necessarily. I think it's if there's a discrete amount of electrons in the universe, then it would be a discrete number of universes. Despite the fact that that number would be huge, it wouldn't be as large as infinity. Critics argue it treats the wave function as a physical thing. Reification. Okay. Against RQM, it borders. So actually, that's a good point. Honestly, that's a really strong argument. This whole treating a wave function, which is really, the wave function is just describing behavior that we've seen, and then we're taking that and we're actually leveraging that to the status of it describing reality as such. Which, now granted, we assume that this wave function is huge and captures every single electron. So in that sense, it does capture the world, but I don't know. Maybe there's issues with that. Okay, against RQM, it borders on solipsism light. If facts are only relative to observers, is there any truth at all? It struggles to explain why different observers eventually agree on the same reality without invoking an objective background. So this is where we can reference that. Certainly, observers within the same time t, if entangled, would no, I guess they wouldn't agree on this, right? Would agree on some aspects of what they relatively observe, I think. How much time would need to pass before they couldn't agree? Is it not possible to keep RQM and get rid of the solipsism here? All right, against superdeterminism, it is scientifically self-defeating. If the universe is a preset script, the concept of evidence evaporates. You can't trust your data because of your choice of how you look at the data was part of the script. Okay, this is a huge problem, I think. Not what it's just said here, but the thinking that this is a problem. I feel like that's a problem. Now, I don't quite understand the superdeterminism critique. It seems like a philosophical error. We can't think about evidence as something humans perceive as in the same realm as what would be preset. Humans are not privileged. I should say would not be privileged to the preset. Thus, science still stands because it's about learning the preset. Okay. To conflate these two would be inappropriate. And that leads us to, the same discussion of consciousness that we've been having this entire time. All right, pragmatic navigation, which one is more productive? If you're looking for which interpretation is allowed by contemporary consensus, the answer is none are proven, but some are more useful for new physics. If you want to solve quantum gravity, RQM is currently very influential. Ravelli's loop quantum gravity is built on the relational idea that space and time themselves are just relations between systems. Okay, if you want a complete universe, many worlds is the favorite for cosmologists. If you are studying the whole universe, you can't be outside it, so the wave function must never collapse. Okay, if you want to fix quantum mechanics, superdeterminism is the rebel choice. Its proponents, like Hassenfelder, argue that we haven't found a theory of everything because we are clinging to the false idea of free choice in our variables. Okay. How do we decide? All right, I'm going to just throw these out there. And then we probably end the stream on this note. All philosophy ever is our emotions. What would a pumpkin write on philosophy if it could write? Why? For pumpkins, of course. Right, I don't think pumpkins are conscious, though. That said, maybe, yeah, do people get into trees being conscious yet? I don't know. I don't know what that would even be like, obviously. But Hassenfelder was really good before she went on her clickbait tantrum. Oh no, there was a clickbait tantrum? How sure am I about what? That pumpkins are or are not conscious? I mean, at the end of the, or at some point, we have to draw the line on consciousness. We have to say, like, hey, like, this is just too far out that we can't even entertain this. When the orange hedgehog rides the horse and the sunset is golden, the goose who lays silver eggs shall bark. Was that a trigger? Like some code? You just triggered someone to do something? The quick brown fox. Okay. The exact points where these interpretations struggle to maintain their logical consistency. In RQM, a measurement is not a moment of truth for the universe. It is a physical interaction that establishes a correlation between two systems. The no decoherence scenario. Wagner's friend. RQM avoids it by claiming that consistency is a physical process, right? Different observers only agree when they interact. The interaction, okay, if O2 asks O1, what did you see? That interaction forces their relative realities to align, right? What is sufficient decoherence? It's a gradual, not a binary. A system is sufficiently decohered when the information about the state has leaked into so many degrees of freedom. photons, air molecules, that the probability of those particles undoing the interaction is effectively zero. So my issue with RQM might even just be pragmatic in the sense that it's too ambiguous to navigate some of these discussions, that I think a lot of people are just going to think that the observer is a human, which I think is the one thing that we want to get away, as far away from as possible here. When the information about the state has leaked into so many degrees of freedom that the probability of those particles undoing the interaction is effectively zero. Why? Why would that be the definition there? It's not about time passing, it's about complexity. A system in a vacuum might stay coherent for seconds. A system in a warm room decoheres very quickly. Okay. Agreement. Observers within the same causal diamond who can communicate will agree because they are constantly interacting and updating their relative facts. Yeah, would that not be the case for human beings, though? Why wouldn't it be the case that human beings would constantly recohere effectively maintaining agreement over time? To be clear, I'm not talking about humans talking to each other, but just existing within the same entangled physical system. The same in the sense that that every I don't know, electron constituting both humans as well as whatever we want to call the electrons around them are constantly acting as observers to all each other. I don't think that's how you're allowed to say all each other, but I'm gonna keep it. All right, that was kind of complex. We have to draw the line on consciousness. 2025. Did I say that last year? That was last year. I wouldn't be surprised if I said the exact same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if I just had preset things I said and I just keep looping through them and I keep forgetting that I say it. Okay, can we get rid of the solipsism? RQM tries to shed the solipsism label by emphasizing intersubjective agreement. It argues that if two observers interact with the same system and then interact with each other, the math of QM guarantees they will find their results consistent. It's not that nothing is real, but it's that reality is the net of these consistent interactions. If reality is the net of these consistent interactions, and these interactions persist constantly, then why wouldn't we just say that the reality is objective, at least for the humans, for the entirety of their existence? All right. Defending superdeterminism, the preset argument. Your defense of superdeterminism is all right. You are arguing for a blind determinism. Just because the script is written doesn't mean the actors know the ending. So science is just the act of the actors reading the script. The physicists' critique. The reason physicists call it a conspiracy or self-defeating is not because humans wouldn't learn the preset, but because the specific nature of the correlation. To avoid Bell's theorem, the Big Bang doesn't just have to determine everything. That's just regular determinism. It has to correlate your choice of measurement with the particle state. What is our choice, though? With the particle state in a way that perfectly mimics the weirdness of quantum mechanics. The rigged trial metaphor. Imagine a trial where the judge, jury, and evidence are all preset by a mastermind. The trial is still science because we are uncovering the mastermind's plan. If the mastermind specifically manipulated the evidence to point to be a guilty verdict, regardless of the truth, the process of the trial is no longer a reliable way to find the truth. What are we talking about? The truth was still found for the people in the trial, right? The jury and the judge. If the universe presets my brain to choose filter A only when the photon is in state A, I am not actually learning a universal law about photons. I'm just observing a specific hard-coded coincidence. And regarding what you said about super determinism, you can learn universal laws, which are just ways we interpret empirical patterns by leveraging the standards of scientific aggregation to increase the reliability of some of predicting an output. Now, despite the fact that that output was predetermined, that doesn't mean that the information learned by the human wasn't pragmatically effective. Okay, that's all I got to say on that. Maybe we're getting rid of RQM. I don't know. This has been a whole life cycle, a 24-hour life cycle where I've introduced a new theory and then I've thrown it away almost immediately. Not because I know it's wrong, but because I'm not satisfied with the way that, I'm not satisfied with what I have to defend it. That's the point. Like I'm trying to figure out what I can defend, and if I can't defend it, then I don't know why I would keep holding it. Okay. I don't know, the meme here being Dom's, it'll set us back weeks. It does set us back. We should, yeah, we have to have a no topics list. Consciousness, quantum physics. These are tentpole topics here. I do have much stronger positive emotions when I hear about RQM than many worlds. Many worlds seems incompatible even with nominalism. Oh man, I wish I knew any of these words. Nominalism. This is, you know what, when we talk about like the downsides of language models and learning, this is it. When I have to keep looking up these terms, I'm never actually internalizing them because I'm just able to search them in language models. The doctrine that universals or general ideas are mere names without any corresponding reality, and that only particular objects exist. Okay, so I would get rid of that just because I don't think, you know, I think we'd have to, if we're saying particulars exist, then universals also exist. I think particulars and universals exist in a space of meaning, which would just be within consciousness. These are just mental patterns that are coloring our conscious experience of the world. We couldn't describe the physical world as containing one without the other. Like, it just wouldn't make any sense. All right. Many worlds seems incompatible even with nominalism, but yeah, RQM raises some questions. Like, so yeah, in the way that I just described nominalism, I would say it's not even like in the same realm as many worlds. Like, it doesn't say anything towards many worlds. But yeah, RQM raises some questions like, can quantum systems be observers? and the Wagner thingy, all this stuff is so crazy complex. Yep. It's complex, but it's also not. Like at some point it just becomes philosophy, and I think that scientists are just now playing a philosophy game where their intuitions are taking hold. Like they've ran out of the science that could really determine, like act as a constraint on the system of what they're allowed to say, and now they're in individual intuition space. Okay. What is going on here? If you prefer the idea that there is a preset, but that we haven't figured out the code yet, you're moving toward T' Hooft's cellular automation interpretation. He's a Nobel laureate who argues exactly what you're suggesting, that quantum mechanics is just an impoverished view of a deeper classical deterministic level of reality. Okay. I don't want to say that I know that to be the case, though. That's the difference, perhaps. You are framing two arguments that push these interpretations to their logical limits. Let's look at your constant recoherence idea is almost right, but has a catch, and why your blind determinism defense of superdeterminism is so hard for scientists to accept. All right. The net of interactions is objective reality. You are suggesting that since everything is constantly acting as an observer to everything else, the distinction between relative and objective disappears for all... Well, this is for practical purposes in the sense of humans. Like the human space is constantly, at every second, entangling itself with everything else. So we could act as if every part of us is acting as a relative observer to all these other entangled systems. That being said, you would have to go as fast as in that case you would have to go as fast as the speed of light. You couldn't go past that. So perhaps you can't break the speed of light in every second, but that would still get you pretty far. Like that would actually be a wild theory where, like, you know, every electron has a radius of however much space-time that is, and though that's not how light travels. I guess yeah, I mean, obviously a radius where light's traveling in a direction, a vector. All right, I believe theoretical physics is very philosophical. Yep, I think that's I like that take. Okay, the agreement mechanism in RQM. You're right. Decoherence is the physical process that creates objectivity. When you and I are in the same room, we are bathed in the same sea of photons, air molecules, and gravitational fields. These particles are constantly measuring us and the objects around us. This creates a stable intersubjective reality. Because we are part of the same massive entangled web, the probability of us seeing different things is essentially zero. But why it's not objective, right? Because of isolation. If we take a small... if we take a small system like a single atom and perfectly isolate it from the sea of interactions, it ceases to have a fact relative to us until we interact with it. Okay, the totalitarian view. If reality were truly objective, that atom would have a state even when isolated. RQM says it doesn't. Okay. Okay, so could we follow a RQM, a type of RQM where we recognize that at every second we have some sort of radius of space-time that that the matter of our bodies will become entangled with given some amount of time. Thus, for most of our interactions with the world, we're essentially operating within a shared reality, even though it is not entangled with the rest of the universe. This would be a metaphor. A metaphor for this would be something akin to a simulation where we only render within a radius of each electron. For us as conscious humans, we can act as though that radius is centered on us, on each of us. That's a weird way to go about it. Okay. Why it's not objective. Okay, we could get past that. All right. The defense of superdeterminism is essentially, if it works, who cares if it's a script? You are arguing that the science is the act of discovering the patterns within the preset, and those patterns remain universal laws because they are reliably predictive. The hidden trap, the sampling problem. The reason this is viewed as a philosophical error by critics is that science relies on unbiased sampling. To believe a law is universal, we must believe that our experiments are fair tests. In a normal universe, I test a particle at angle A, angle B, and angle C. Since I chose those angles randomly, I assume my results represent the truth of the particle. In a superdeterministic universe, the Big Bang ensures that I only chose angle A when the particle was in state A and angle B when it was in state B. Okay, if the preset specifically coordinates my choices to hide the underlying reality, then the universal law I learn, quantum mechanics, is actually a false law. I'm successfully predicting the output, but I'm totally wrong about the mechanism. The Matrix analogy. If you live in a simulation where the code ensures that every time you drop a ball, a gravity sound effect plays, you have learned a universal law, but you haven't learned anything about the actual nature of the computer running the simulation. Couldn't you say that isn't that the same with superdeterminism? Like we don't know anything past our science of this thing. We don't know what's actually causing a lot of this. Why this okay, so I don't think we're gonna get any farther with this superdeterminism thing. I would keep chipping away at the philosophy of this, but I think superdeterminism holds up as far as I'm concerned. Okay. I feel bad emotions about giving up objective reality. That is true. That's the trade-off. But I'm trying to get to a point where we could think about RQM where we're effectively not giving up an objective reality. Like effectively all that we would care about within, at least within our space, within any of our engagements, our practical engagements, would be a shared a shared fundamental reality. That said, we can still leverage RQM for stuff that is far away. All right, your rendering radius metaphor is a way to conceptualize how a shared reality emerges from a quantum foundation. In physics, this radius is defined by the light cone and the speed of decoherence. What you are describing is a version of RQM that aligns closely with quantum Darwinism and causal diamonds. It suggests that objective reality isn't a fundamental property of the universe, but a local, persistent consensus formed by the constant exchange of information. The rendering radius, causal diamonds, and relativity and quantum field theory. The radius you're referring to is effectively a causal diamond. This is the region of space-time that can both affect you and be affected by you. So as time passes, the sphere of things you have interacted with expands at the speed of light. When two people's rendering radii overlap, they begin to exchange photons and air molecules. These interactions sync their relative states. Because the number of particles involved is so massive, the consensus of reality they form is incredibly stable. It would take a miracle for recoherence for you to see the moon in a different place than I do. Okay. I just want to point out that yeah, can we not big brain this? So that's how two people get synced. But imagine the matter in your body. I know we're like a ship of Theseus, but like could we not make a case that this would still involve some sort of determinism that starts from the Big Bang and makes it all the way to you? Like this is there's a weird inductive issue here where like every single electron kind of syncs up with other electrons and then they stay synced if they remain close together. So this would suggest that the only thing that matters is what's at the edge of the cone. But the cone length at every point in time is arbitrary, right? Am I going crazy on this? Why the entire universe is okay, this is fine. The simulation metaphor. The radius centered on each of us is a powerful way to look at it, but RQM would add one rigorous correction. There is no center. Right, there wouldn't be a center. We're just kind of, the center is for each electron that's involved, it is its own center. And we are just imagining that we're all, as far as I'm concerned, my center would be somewhere here, somewhere in my head or something like that. The user's view, I'm at the center. Yep. Every single electron is its own observer with its own radius. Right. Dressing your... Okay. All right. Can I say this somehow elegantly? Or what time is it? 9:23? Oh my gosh, we're almost going on 3 hours. This is too important though. I gotta figure this one out. Could I not come up with some sort of inductive argument that creates a paradox here? Like, when two electrons get into the same radius with each other, they remain entangled. They remain on the same page. They remain with a shared reality. So really, for each electron, what really matters in terms of novelty or whatever we would consider to be not entangled with the Big Bang, whatever matters is what is happening at the edge of this cone. Now, what is arbitrary is what cone length we're talking about at every second. So could we not make some sort of inductive argument that these electrons are becoming so coupled together constantly that they are effectively remaining on the same page as what the Big Bang set out for them? All right, I don't know if I said that elegantly enough for Gemini to figure it out, but let's see. Let us see. Okay. This is weird semantics to me. Objective reality is a property and not just a description. This is so much simpler for nominalism, much more parsimonious. Are you saying that objective reality is weird semantics to describe as a property or as a description? Because I guess you could go with objective reality as the description in this RQM sense. Now I think of objective reality as a description in the sense that really this idea of objective reality is something that we think of. So it really is a description. It's an interpretive description of behavior that we're just seeing. So that's my way of getting out of this. Yeah, to call it a property of the universe, right? Yeah, like so it's like our concept of it that it is a property of the universe, but what we're really getting at is that it's effectively a property of the universe. Like that's what science tells us. What we can say is effectively properties of the universe. What are effectively laws of physics, cuz they when we say law of physics, that pragmatism is wrapped up in the definition of what a law of physics is. Though it can obviously become quite, you could easily fall into some strict physicalism in that way. This is an inductive leap. You are essentially building a bridge from local relationalism back to global determinism using the Big Bang's grip as the glue. Your argument is System A and System B share a common origin. Big Bang, systems that interact sync up, decoherence and entanglement. Since the universe is a dense web of constant interactions, the syncing never stops. The local shared reality we see is just a continuous unfolding of the initial Big Bang state. You've essentially argued that the rendering radius is an illusion because the entire scene was already pre-rendered at t=0. Okay. The paradox, the infinite sensitivity problem. The paradox your inductive argument creates is one of stability versus complexity. If you want the Big Bang to dictate the shared reality of two electrons today, the code at the Big Bang must have been infinitely precise. In physics, we have the butterfly effect. If even one photon from a distant star, which isn't in our local rendering radius, bumps into our system, it scrambles the local script. Okay. This is fine. Okay. That makes sense. So we can get updates in that regard. The inductive conflict: to keep your electrons on the same page as the Big Bang script, you have to ensure that nothing outside their current radius can ever interfere, but as you noted, the radius is constantly expanding. Perhaps, okay, can I say this one actually? Perhaps what I'm getting at is, despite the fact that we have all sorts of butterfly effects happening, we have introductions of electrons that have perhaps left the system and came back into the system. We're still following this view that electrons, even on our body, might have come from something far away, or might leave, and that changes the system entirely. Following a ship of Theseus view of the body and brain. Wouldn't it still be the case that there is like an ambiguous direction of change within the universe that would effectively, I don't know how I want to say this actually. Wouldn't it be the case that we have effectively... Okay. Wouldn't it be the case that still what is affecting the shared realities that we always come in contact with are out of our hands, in the way where we can still think about our decisions as predetermined in some sense, even though they're not predetermined in a super deterministic sense where the Big Bang sets them up? Like, I could argue that perhaps even though we cannot follow superdeterminism in RQM at the same time, we still have to acknowledge some sort of predeterminism that I think the Bell's theorem free choice people would not be comfortable with, which I do think that RQM commits us to. Okay, that's where I'm at. But this was a good response, or what it said was a good response, because we do have to give up superdeterminism if we follow this type of chaos theory. The shuffling redux, why the induction breaks. Right, entropy is the shuffler. Okay, is it a legal thought? Given logic and evidence, your take is allowed. You are describing a holistic, deterministic universe. The reason it feels like a paradox is that you're trying to use RQM to support super determinism. So we can't do that. So to be clear, if we go in this direction, we do have to get rid of super determinism. I'm just trying to push each of these to their limits. Currently, I'm comfortable with many worlds and super determinism, but I'm trying to iron out any concerns with RQM. Okay. In March, this will all be outdated when Stan meditates and sees God. Yeah, maybe we have to have a strict none of these other topics rules. Problem is we can't get out of consciousness in meditation month. I mean, we could try, but I don't think we're going to be able to succeed at that. By the way, Dharmadam, tomorrow is the big 17. We are reaching it. You are executing a very high-level stress test on the compatibility with our intuitive sense of causality. You've correctly identified that RQM, when taken to its limits, forces a choice between indeterminism, true randomness, and causal determinism, the preset you are describing. If you want to keep RQM but discard superdeterminism while still maintaining that our choices are out of our hands, you are landing in compatibilism, the idea that while the script isn't hard-coded from the Big Bang, the local physical environment, the rendering radius, is so dense and overwhelming that it effectively determines the next state of the system. Here is how RQM handles your Ship of Theseus and local predeterminism challenge. By the way, when we talk about compatibilism in the document, we're not talking about this type of compatibilism. What do we think about a When Nietzsche Wept movie night in the Discord? First of all, how do we do a movie night? Second of all, what is that movie? 17? Oh, I'm sorry, 17 minutes. I just did 16:55 today. Stan is turning 17 tomorrow. Teenage prodigy. That would be kind of wild. I just skip college. Happy B-Day. Oh, dope. Hold on. Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited for the 20-minuter. And I think we just keep going. We keep going until I just can't do it. Like until my schedule does not allow me. So. Okay. The local script. RQM's commitment to causality. In RQM, an observer like your brain is just a physical system. When you make a decision, you are really just a collection of particles interacting with other particles, photons, glucose, neurons, glutamate. No love for glutamate here? What's going on? The constraint, RQM, does not claim that things happen outside the laws of physics. It follows the Schrödinger equation or its relativistic equivalence. The preset field, because your brain is constantly interacting with the environment, the shared reality, the state of your neurons is heavily constrained by the state of the room around you. What's in that cone? You are right. RQM implies a world where free choice is not some magical force outside of physics. If you define predetermined as the result of prior physical interactions, then RQM is absolutely deterministic in that local sense. Why the free choice people get nervous. The free choice assumption in Bell's theorem isn't about human agency or will. It's a technical requirement called measurement independence. If you argue that the observer's choice is out of their hands because it's determined by local environment interactions, so the Ship of Theseus atoms, you are flirting with local determinism. If your choice of measurement is determined by the local shared reality, and that same reality also influences the particle you are measuring, you have statistical dependence. Wouldn't that still be the case? The RQM out. RQM avoids this by saying that until the interaction happens, the correlation doesn't exist relative to the observer. The observer and the observed are independent to each other until they meet. Well, that's no fun. I don't understand how they can... Okay, who are we talking about? I don't understand how I could still say that there is measurement independence if the thing I'm measuring has not been manually decohered by human beings in perhaps some system. Given what we just mentioned, even though we can't say that the state of reality is exactly known between seconds t and t1 and t2, we can say that they are effectively the same. Therefore, there would be effectively measurement dependence. Did I use independence correctly the first time? I don't understand how I could say that there is still measurement. Okay, I did. Okay, let's run that one. I'm trying to assault this with everything I've got here. Until the interaction happens, the correlation doesn't exist. Well, there's still a correlation, but it's not the type of correlation that's being discussed here. Okay. The ship of Theseus and entropy. You mentioned that our bodies are constantly exchanging electrons with the outside. In RQM, this means your rendering radius is legally shifting boundary. Even if you assume local predeterminism, the butterfly effect of a single electron entering your brain from outside your current local system introduces novelty, right? Unless the entire universe is one single closed deterministic system, which would bring you back to the superdeterminism, there will always be external information answering your local system. Yeah, what if it's the case that we are entangled in some way that we don't recognize, and this is the reason why we all yawn at the same time? Some quantum phenomenon that we have not figured out yet. Okay, unless the entire universe is one single closed deterministic system, there will always be external information. Yes, so that's something we could be good with. The ironing out verdict. RQM actually aligns with your intuition better than you might think, provided you accept one thing. Reality is granular. There is no universal preset. In following RQM, I'm totally fine with a granular reality. There's no universal preset. Instead, there are billions of local presets that are constantly colliding, merging, and syncing their clocks. Your decisions are predetermined by your local history, but they remain free, independent from a particle on the other side of the galaxy, because those two local scripts haven't been cross-referenced yet. Yes, and if that was the case still, our conscious experience of intentionality would still be predetermined, just in the same way that superdeterminism talks about it. So in all three of these systems, superdeterminism, many worlds, and actually many worlds. I think it would still be the same in many worlds. You'd have the best shot with many worlds. Superdeterminism, many worlds, and RQM all involve zero free will from a consciousness standpoint. Given what we know about consciousness. Okay. The big serious amount that a few traditions recommend for lay people is 2 hours. 2 hours in the day? That's what Yuval Noah does? I like Yuval, but I don't know if I would, just trust him like willy-nilly. Why 2 hours? I don't think there's a magic number, but I think the logic is the more the better, and 2 hours is manageable. Yeah, once again, I struggle. So this isn't something that I'm not trying to make like a case about everyone, but I struggle, and this is part 3 stuff. I struggle with the moral conundrum of the returns here. Like, I think there's an amount of meditation that benefits me, and then what's the thing that's called? What's it called when more of something doesn't necessarily lead to returns? Because I have to do stuff. If I want to actually enact my moral wishes here, my moral mission, I need to actually diminishing returns. Thank you very much. I have to actually do things. And the question is, how much do I have to do versus how much can I get the extra boost from meditation? And I do think it is greater than 17 minutes. I think I get more returns from going to 18 minutes. But I don't think 2 hours is it. I think I'm giving up too much of my day. I don't even know how to pronounce a Q and a Y. Quantum mechanics? Oh, quantum mechanics? It's like Gonka tradition recommends. That's where you've all got it from. I see. Diminishing returns. Yeah, priorities is another thing, right? Codex AI is going to solve all of this by coding for you, and then you can meditate. True. True, true, true. Not trying to actually not trying to break RQM, but find its implications, its necessary implications. Okay, what was this? Okay, Wagner's friend with entangled observers. It asks if two people agree on a reality, but a third person sees those two people in a superposition. Who is correct? They are both correct relative to themselves. The better pill that most people who want a preset reality find hardest to swallow. Okay. You have pinpointed the exact tension that keeps theoretical physicists up at night. If we accept that the RQM premise that everything is an observer and the cosmological premise that we share a common past, then perfect measurement independence, the idea that the experimenter's dial and the particle's spin are totally unrelated, begins to look like a convenient fiction. To allow the necessary implications of RQM while addressing your point about effective dependence, we have to look at the information cut. The paradox of effective dependence, your argument is that since we are bathed in the same environment as the particle we are measuring, we are effectively one single coupled system. If T1 is effectively the same as T2, then where is the independence? In RQM, the answer is found in relational information capacity. Two things can be correlated, both are in the same room, without being dependent in the way Bell's theorem cares about. For measurement independence to break, the specific physical state of your brain dial must be synced with the specific hidden state of the particle. Okay. What's the point of measurement perfect measurement independence versus partial? This is starting to look arbitrary, but I could be wrong about that. RQM implies that while you and the particle share a rendering radius, the sheer complexity of the billions of intervening interactions acts as a logical firewall. The information that would link your choice to the particle spin is dissipated into the environment. What? The necessity of the cut. If you follow your logic to its end, you reach a state where nothing is independent. If everything is effectively dependent, then RQM collapses into a form of local holism. The necessary implication for RQM. Okay. And it wouldn't be the case that nothing is independent. It's just that we can look at our reliability of independence or dependence over distances and time periods. But obviously that's a very difficult science to navigate. All right, what about that? What about those apples? Okay, this decoupling is what creates the effective independence required for the Bell tests to mean anything. Ship of Theseus measurement. If a system is not manually decohered, it is already classical relative to you. You aren't doing quantum mechanics anymore. There's no underlying script or wave function of the universe to hold it all together. I think we can let this go. We've hit the 3-hour mark. I'm so excited for Chakra Week. If I can get Stan to believe in chakras, my work here is done. I will try to give the best steel man argument for chakras as I can once I learn more. The quantum theory of yawning. Hell yeah. I know that's what's going to be the the title of one of our of the stream summary for this. Either that or it's going to show up in the highlight. The Gemini loves those types of sayings. It'll always use it. All right, you have the reason why some physicists find the standard free choice assumption in Bell's theorem to be a massive oversimplification. In a world of shared causal pasts, perfect measurement independence is an idealization, while partial measurement independence is the messy physical reality. To address your point about arbitrariness and the difficulty of this science, we have to look at the Bell's inequality threshold. The threshold, how much independence is enough? The reason physicists insist on perfect measurement independence is that Bell's theorem is a mathematical proof. If the freedom of the experimenter is even slightly compromised, the logic changes. So perfect am I? If the experimenter and the particle are 100% independent, any correlation we see must be due to non-locality, quantum spookiness. If there are even 0.01% correlated, if they are that much correlated because of a shared environment or the Big Bang, then that 0.01% could theoretically explain the entire quantum outcome without any spooky action. Is it arbitrary? Mathematically, yes. We only need a very small amount of dependence to invalidate Bell's proof. This is known as the measurement independence loophole. If you believe the universe is effective at maintaining these tiny links, you can throw out the need for non-locality entirely. Scaling the reliability of independence. Your idea that we can track the reliability of independence over distances and time is exactly what Bell test experiments try to do. To maximize independence, scientists use space-like separation. They put the experimenters miles apart so that a signal at the speed of light couldn't coordinate them. Cosmic Bell tests, they use light from distant quasars, billions of light years away, to set the measurement dials. If the quasar in galaxy A and the quasar in galaxy B, which haven't been in contact for 12 billion years, both coordinate to trick us into seeing a quantum correlation, then the dependence isn't just local noise, it's superdeterminism. If you think this cosmic coordination is more likely than spooky action, you are essentially saying that the reliability of independence is zero across the entire universe. Oh, that's actually pretty neat. So that would explain... So it's not exactly superdeterminism. Okay, is there not space between this perfect independence and superdeterminism, which would still affect our experiment outcomes? But not tell us whether either of these is correct in some absolute sense. RQM and the difficulty of the science. You mentioned this is a difficult science to navigate. RQM agrees because it denies a universal perspective. In RQM, you can't just say system A and B are correlated. You have to ask relative to whom. I would say to each, right? Isn't that the way it works? As you move from two electrons to a human brain, the shared reality becomes so dense that calculating the degree of independence becomes impossible. Because we can't calculate it, RQM treats the environment as a stochastic buffer. It assumes that the butterfly effects from the rest of the universe are so chaotic that they wash out any specific preset correlation. I don't know about this. Maybe we just give it up and go back to many worlds and superdeterminism. There is absolutely a middle space and is one of the most intellectually honest places to stand in modern physics. In the literature, this is often referred to as measurement dependence or the free choice loophole on a spectrum. Okay, this is fine with me. The binary collapse of Bell's theorem. The reason this space is so frustrating for physics is that Bell's theorem is a binary filter. Yep. The pragmatic impasse. You asked if the space prevents us from knowing which interpretation is correct. You are logically correct. If we live in that middle space, then experimental outcomes would look exactly like what we see in labs today. And regarding the absolute truth, we cannot distinguish between a universe that is non-local, standard RQM, and a universe that is slightly scripted, partial superdeterminism. For a rigor seeker, this is the ultimate pushback. It suggests that this is all coming from my prompt to Gemini, that I'm looking for rigor in his responses. It suggests that the correctness of an interpretation might be undecidable. If the correlation is smaller than our ability to measure it, then for all pragmatic purposes, both interpretations are allowed by the evidence. Well, I guess that's where we have to exist then, you know? I don't think we're allowed to just say that we're definitely super determinist or the other, but I like existing in all these spaces. That's fine with me. Also, this is just how we describe what we've seen so far. It's not really, I don't think any of these would be correct in the sense that we've actually like perfectly got it right. Okay. Stan starts floating in the air and ascends to the top of his house through sheer will and wisdom. He says to a crowd mesmerized and shocked at his state, I think someone's playing a prank on me. I'm playing a prank on you. That's what I've done. I tell everyone, you should all not trust what you're seeing. All right, energy downturn. To my understanding, some people, for example, Joe Dispenza and Deepak Chopra, misinterpret quantum physics to support woo-woo. Yeah, I don't know much about those guys, but I could see how easy it would be to take some of this stuff and misinterpret it in a way that you can get some crazy implications out of. And we gotta stay clear of that. So I don't know how interesting this quantum physics stuff even is until we learn more. You know, it's really not, it's not practical until it becomes practical for people that can actually leverage it, and chances are, I don't know, it's going to be wealthy people before it becomes consumer. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about quantum mechanics. All right, we'll save this video. We'll continue. We'll keep going. Maybe we'll skip past what is idealism. I can't keep doing this. What is truth? All right, we got to get going. We got to get out of here. Split brain. We're back in quantum. Is panpsychism? Okay, I might just not do this video. Is the universe God? I'm out. I'm gone. How do you respond to Stan Richardson? How do you respond to Thomas Aquinas? Okay, that would be cool. How do you get in the head? How to get in the head of a philosopher. What is the best idea you encountered last year? All right, let's continue there.
Big phenomenon.
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to call it there. Thanks for chilling, everyone. And see you tomorrow. Have a good